Welcome to another episode of Indiana Politics. I'm Deb Chubb, and we are very excited to talk about a very large issue with Steve Key, the Executive Director and General Counsel for the Indiana Hoosier Press Association.
Hoosier State Press Association.
I'm so sorry. I don't know why I can't get that right. So, but thank you for being here. And just to give a little background, if you could, about your organization. I know you do work, with the legislature on legislation, involving public notice and access. But tell us a little bit more about your organization, how many members, and we want to know, member press outlets. Has that changed? Has that changed over the years? And where are you at now?
Well, we represent the state's paid circulation newspapers, and currently that's right at 150 newspapers across the state, and those range from small hyper local weekly papers with maybe 1,000 circulation, up to your larger daily newspapers across the state. The Indianapolis Star, the Times of Northwest Indiana, the Journal Gazette of Fort Wayne. So we run the full gamut as far as size of newspapers across the state. And you're right, the main function, and the reason why we've existed since 1933 is to represent the newspaper industry before various government entities, primarily the state legislature. And there, if you talk to legislators, they know us most because we get involved with the access to information. Whether it's the things that fall under the open door law, where governments or entities are required to meet in the open, Access to Public Records Act, which recognizes that government records belong to the people, not to the government agencies. And then the third leg of that transparency platform is public notice advertising, where the legislature has deemed that there is certain information that has an importance to get in front of the public as part of a functioning democracy, that they require government agencies to actually place a notice in the paper and pay for that notice so that there's no editing of it. It's exactly what the law prescribes for it to be in there.
That's great. And, we were talking about one very good example of this function, and that is environmental issues. There was a requirement that Indiana Department of Environmental Management publish notices about public hearings and about permit renewals and permit applications so that the public could hear about what kind of environmental impacts were coming to their community and go to a public forum and comment on the new thing or a permit renewal. This was your chance to complain about the way that the industry had been performing in the past under the old permit. This was your chance to, be a face-to-face with the industry and ask questions about what they were doing. And this was a chance to bring your friends into this issue and make them aware of what was happening in their environments. And as you mentioned, there are many government agencies now who are trying to move those public notices from public newspapers just to a website. And in my previous work in environmental activism, I will tell you, I have tried to get on IDEM's, they call it the file cabinet, and find things. And it is really near impossible to find stuff. And to think that now even public notices about environmental permitting and, problems with that permit or new industries coming into your community, the only way the public would know about it is if they somehow figured it out on their own and managed to get to the file cabinet at IDEM and managed to dig through. And, you have to kind of find the corporate name of the industry, figure it out. I mean, it's just really tragic, in my opinion. And I know that there were a number of bills this year proposed to do more of that, to move more of those public notices just onto government agency websites, which are, I will say again, not the easiest to navigate. And so, and we'll only get people who, are intensely interested in finding that information. So, so any other bills happening this session that we should be looking out for, that we should be worried about?
Well, we're getting close to the end of the session. The committee deadline for bills that are being heard that originated from the other chambers coming up this week. So we're getting down to, after that'll be what's called conference committees. So a lot of, a lot of the bills have already died or going to be dying within the next week. As far as public notice, the only significant bill that's kind of still out there and moving would be Senate Bill 332, authored by Senator Jim Buck, a Republican from Kokomo. And what this bill does is it's focused only on public notices that are required to be published 2 or 3 times in the newspaper. And what his bill would do would say the first publication would still go into the local newspaper, be printed, but the subsequent, the second or third, depending on which statute we're talking about, notices, the government entity could take the option of, rather than posting or publishing it in the newspaper, they could post it on an official website, most likely their government website. So it doesn't mean that these notices won't be in the paper. They just won't be in the paper multiple times for these certain specific notices, which obviously reduces, the opportunity. In real estate, you always talk about location. When you talk about advertising, it's frequency. How many times are you putting it in front of the reader? And the concern, although we are, we have supported the bill at its last committee hearing in kind of good faith, working with Senator Buck and with the legislature, because we are proposing, or we basically pledged to the leadership that we are going to be bringing to the legislature in 2022 a comprehensive bill on public notice advertising to kind of modernize it and try to recognize that as more and more Hoosiers are going to the digital platforms to get their local news, we want to make sure the public notices are going to be presented in a fashion where they can still be accessible, verifiable, archived, and should continue to go through an independent entity as far as the source of distribution. People are used to reading their paper to find out their local news. It would be crazy to think that any family, particularly families of kids, who, they've got to get their kids to Little League or soccer practice or dance recitals, whatever the case may be. Then they get them home, finish up any homework if it's school still in session, get the kids fed, get the laundry, the dishes taken care of, and then expect that the parents or single parent is going to sit down and say, okay, it's now time for me to figure out what's government's doing that might impact me. And I've got to go through and I've got to look at, various state websites. I've got to look at my county commissioner's website, maybe a separate website for the council, BZA, planning commission, my school district. Is there a library district? There's no way that anybody's going to go to all these websites on a regular basis to see if something is coming up or is being contemplated that they would be concerned about. What's always been the case, and it goes back before Indiana was a state, is that important public notices that the government thinks wants to get into Hoosiers' hands have gone through their local Indiana newspapers, because that's where people are going to look for their local news. And with newspapers, there's always been kind of serendipity that you're going to your newspaper, not necessarily looking for a public notice, because you don't know the public notice that you're interested in is going to be in there. But while you're reading the paper, there the public notices are, and it's like, oh, what's happening to that cornfield across the street that we always thought was going to be a cornfield? It looks like that somebody wants to put an asphalt plant there, or a super gigantic mega store there. They're not going to know that notice is going to be in there, but they discover the notice, or their neighbor discovers the notice and lets them know. And that's one of the great things and the effectiveness of newspapers, decade after decade.
Right. And so as we make this kind of monumental shift, it feels like, to getting your news online instead of with a piece of paper in your hand, which, you know, I'm really kind of emotionally attached to. So I'm having a hard time, but I can't imagine now doing it. So now I do get a lot of my news online, and I don't get it in that format. I don't get it where, you know, I get a headline and then I click on that headline, but nowhere attached to that headline next to it is an article about, you know, the asphalt company that may be coming to town, or, you know, notice of a public hearing about change in zoning in your community. So I'm not sure how we are going to address that. I know you have mentioned that that your organization does have a website where you consolidate public notices from all of the newspapers that are members of your association into one spot, which would be helpful if I had known about that, or if any, you know, people knew about it, that might be helpful. But again, the notion that I'm just going to randomly, you know, go to that website and look and see if anything's happening is really pretty remote. So I think we really have to do a lot of consideration of what's happening now that people are getting their news online. Of course, people are getting it a different way. They're getting it through different sources, and you're presented with all kinds of sources at once. You know, when I am a newspaper consumer, you know, I subscribe to the New York Times. I subscribe to, you know, a terrifically done local newspaper, which unfortunately has just gone out of business. And, you know, and maybe a couple of others, but I know everything in there is, you know, is from this reliable, trusted source. But when I go online and I see a same news item, but the headline presented by very different sources, of course, the headline looks a lot different. And when I click on one from, you know, the New York Times, then the algorithms are instructed to send me more information from the New York Times. When I click on Fox News, the algorithms of my social media, et cetera, you know, and that is, you know, because I don't know if you know, but in Facebook, you know, there's a whole news section. So Facebook is not only shaping the information you get in your news feed, but when you click on their news department, they're also molding the news message you get. So if I click on a source in there from Fox News, well, then I'm going to get more information from Fox News. You know, and I'm really aware of that. So I make sure and click them all so that I get a good mix. But, you know, if you're not doing that, if you're clicking Fox News all the time, then you're just getting Fox News, who I don't think even pretends anymore to be, you know, completely fact-based or you know, unbiased. So so this is just, this just seems like a mountain of a problem that we are going to have to address. And so I wonder if your organization has given any thought to that. And then, of course, we have to point out too the very recent Supreme Court decision that will allow one owner to own many more media outlets, which will kind of further flatten the diversity of information that consumers will get, because of course it's the same owner putting out the same script to all of these different media outlets. So I know that's a lot, but you know, can you speak to first the, you know, the kind of monopoly that we're inviting on news production through this new Supreme Court decision that was unanimous, by the way, and really said that that the FCC doesn't have to consider the impact on women and minorities and other diversity issues that might be squelched from this kind of monopolizing of media outlets. And then also, you know, how are we going to get our news, and how are we going to do it in a way that really provides people with what they need to know to protect themselves and their communities?
Well, there is a lot there. You know, as far as the cross ownership, you know, that's not necessarily, you know, something from, you know, our organization that we oppose. You know, and part of that is based on the cost of providing the news. And, you know, as advertising, unfortunately, has migrated primarily to Google and Facebook, it's put the newspaper industry into, a financial straitjacket. Then you throw a pandemic on top of that, which further eroded the advertising dollar, and the paid newspaper circulation model for decades and decades has been the advertiser pays the bulk of the cost because they want to get their message in front of the readers of the newspaper, because those readers are then going out and using that advertising to spend dollars on product. So you've seen, unfortunately, as you mentioned, we've had 13 Indiana papers that actually closed their doors because of the pandemic, on top of the financial situation, and other papers who reduced their frequency, because it costs money to run that press and get those papers distributed out to everyone. So you've seen, consolidation efforts between papers operations. There are now situations where if you want to place an ad in a newspaper, that ad person that you're talking to may not be in your county. They may be a few counties over, or in some cases they may not even be in the state that are working with you on getting your ad placed and designing your ad. The reporting staffs have had to shrink and cover greater areas. So by allowing this cross ownership, it does allow for, again, the ability for a news entity to be able to reduce total cost because they're able to centralize certain operations. So that's not going to go away. What I think you will see, though, is you may see as those operations struggle to cover greater and greater territory, it may open up the avenue for smaller competitors who are more localized. So you may have an operation that tries to cover 2 or 3 counties, or focus its coverage on one particular county, but that may leave an opening for a competitor who can figure out a financial model that makes an ability for them to really cover that particular school district that's not located in the county seat, or that town that's kind of at the far corner of a particular community. So there's going to be opportunities there. As far as the misinformation and the problems that you have with Facebook and Google, there's a lot we could get into there. Part of it is what's the adequate compensation that should go back to those who create the news from a Google and Facebook, which is basically taking advantage of the news that's being created to help create clicks, excuse me, on their platforms, which is what they live on, because the more times you're clicking on to Google or Facebook and then seeing the ads that go along with it, or clicking through those ads because you're seeing them, that's more revenue for them. And that's what has led to these algorithms that are designed to reinforce what they think you want to see, so that if you click on a particular story or subject matter, then you're going to get suggested, 4 or 5 more stories on that particular subject matter. Whereas the traditional newspaper has that's been dropped on your doorstep, has been designed to serve a greater public, not just you, but you, your community surrounding you, which has required them to make sure that they cover more stories, and cover them in a balanced way, not necessarily trying to just reinforce your perceptions or what they think your perceptions are on the subject, but to give you journalism, which tries to give you the truth, the best that they can determine, which means they're not going to just talk to someone who may agree with you on your point of view, but they may also talk to somebody who's on the other side of that story, so that you're getting a more well-rounded look at that issue, so that you can make a more informed determination on, well, maybe my original view on this development that they're talking about bringing into my community, I was thinking it's going to be a bad thing. Well, maybe it's not as bad as I thought now that I'm hearing both sides of the story. So there's a whole different perspective there with a paid paper, because their realm of the coin is credibility. If you don't trust and believe what your newspaper is giving you, why would you pay for it? You know, whereas Facebook and Google aren't depending on you to pay them because you want to get on Facebook or Google. Their realm is how many times they can get you to click on, and how many times they can, because that is where their profit comes in, is the more times you're clicking onto certain things and seeing their ads, and if they are doing that by steering you towards whatever your viewpoint on life already is and reinforcing that, that's fine for them. They are not worried about whether or not you're getting a well-rounded slice of the story. All they're concerned about is how many times are you going to click onto that, because the credibility is not what they depend upon, where your newspaper has to depend on credibility or you don't use it anymore.
Right. And so, and, now we see where that has led us to, a world where we have just parallel realities, where people could not be more convinced that the Democratic Party is run by Satanists, or, people who are running child trafficking operations. And of course the opposite, is out there. There's people who look at people who believe that and just think, what, and you can hardly even accept the notion of some of the things that people are believing, and who walk around on the streets and say, out in the open, that they believe. So this is where, apparently we are now. And so I know, and I won't even ask you, like, how do we fix this? Because I don't think anyone has a really great idea. Unless you got something, I'm all ears.
Well, part of it is people need to be educated about how these systems work. And, because a lot of this that's gone on, it just kind of has grown in the past few years. And if you ask me to define an algorithm, I don't think I could give you a definition of an algorithm. But a lot of people are impacted by how algorithms are being used, and they don't really maybe understand, the system. And so, if they either were older and grew up in a system where, oh, here's my newspaper, I trust it to give me the news, and I, I think they're going to be fair about the coverage that they have. And so that's kind of the way they thought news was done. And now you have, a situation where you have, if I click onto Hulu in the evening and I ask for my choices for news shows, coming up are shows that aren't really news, they're political commentary. And, it can be political commentary that leans towards the right, or it can be political commentary that leans to the left. But when I'm clicking on my platform, and I'm not just picking on Hulu, but any platform, they're not telling you, oh, these evening shows, these are not really news shows, they're political commentary on news. So people look at it, and either they walk away thinking, wow, this is terrible, what this other side is doing based on what I'm hearing, or they look at it and say, wow, the media is really biased because this is obviously leaning this way or that way. So but they're not really separating the fact that that's not necessarily news, it's political commentary. And then, on top of that, then as they're getting online and looking at things, they're not thinking or realizing that, okay, when I click on story A, that's triggering a reaction from the platform, the internet platform, to send me 4 more stories that reinforce, the point of view that I read, and is not going to give me 3 or 4 stories that cover the wide breadth of that issue and the different sides. So if people realize what's happening to them, then they can take that political commentary story for what it's worth in the evening and say, oh, okay, this is the spin that this side's putting on the issue. And if I want to get the spin from the other side, I know I can go to this channel and I'll hear something that's 180 degrees different, but I'll know that where it's coming from. Or if they're online and they're, if they are educated enough, they can say, okay, I'm not necessarily just going to take the 5 headlines from the same news source that they suggested. I may want to read a story from another news outlet because that'll give me a little bit different perspective than what I'm getting from this particular news outlet. But until we educate them on that, then they may still be thinking that this is the same as it used to be. News is news, and it's fair, and gives me both sides of the story. And that's just not necessarily happening because of the way some of these new paradigms are constructed.
Well, let's hope that we don't have a whole lot more time, but let's hope that the journalists who are getting squeezed out, by this new shift, both to online and to more, partisan and biased news, can come together and find a way to really persevere with a really unbiased, both sides of every issue, education and informing of the public.
Well, I'm going to try to be optimistic because I still believe that, journalism is vital and journalism is desired, by people, whether it's at the very local level, the state level, or they want national news. And, because they all understand that that's how they learn what's going on in their community or their country or their state. So the appetite is there. Unfortunately, the financial model has cracked, but there's also things that are in the works that may change that model. There is legislation that may be floated in the Congress that looks at allowing newspapers to band together to try to negotiate for compensation from a Facebook and a Google. This has already been done in Australia. France has passed legislation too, I believe, where they're looking at, forcing the platforms that are basically sucking up most of the advertising dollars and are taking advantage of the ability that, they control and present news through these algorithms to individuals. But there isn't any compensation that goes back to the newspaper, TV station, or freelancer, whoever who's created the content. And that is as something that's being looked at as far as trying to allow for a level playing field between those who are creating the news and those who are controlling the distribution and the collection of data from that distribution that allows them to make more money.
Right. Wow. Wow, that's great. Oh, that's terrific. That's new to me, and I'm just that does give me hope. So that's great. So, all right. Well, we are out of time. So I do want to ask you though, any other parting words of wisdom for us out here in in media consuming land?
Well, just to encourage people to continue to support their local newspapers, because if the newspaper dies in their community, they have to ask themselves, who's going to go to that school board meeting, city council, cover the basketball games, all the things that bind a community together and allow it to move forward as a democratic unit. So, support your local newspaper.
All right, great. All right, well, thanks again for joining us. And I've learned so much. And so hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime.
Love to talk again.
All right.